They tried to break me with silence, humiliation, disdain. But when the people who were supposed to love me most cast me aside, I didn't crumble, I transformed. This isn't just a story of what they did to me. It's about what I chose to do with the pieces. It's not a tale of revenge. It's the truth of how I became. Before we dive in, please kindly subscribe, like, and share. It helps us grow and keeps these stories coming your way. And don't forget to drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from. We love seeing where our audience is tuning in from around the world. They called me a mistake. Not just in private, but loudly, cruelly, publicly. My own parents, Marcia and Elliot Vance, ripped my wedding invitation into glittering confetti right there in the center of their 34th floor Chicago penthouse, in front of 30 well-dressed guests sipping champagne and nibbling caviar. My mother's diamond-studded nails glinted in the chandelier light as she tore the thick cardstock. "Trash deserves trash," she said flatly, letting the pieces fall like ashes. My father laughed, raising his glass as if her cruelty deserved a toast. I stood frozen. I'd hand-delivered the envelope, the last ounce of hope clutched in my trembling fingers. My fiancé, Elias, waited outside, unaware that inside this tower of glass and pride, I was being gutted. My older brother Adrian leaned lazily on the marble fireplace, sipping his bourbon. He smirked without lifting his eyes from his phone. Adrian, the Vance golden boy. Wall Street investor, media darling, and the family's shining light. He had been flown to boarding schools, gifted cars at 16, praised for average achievements as if they were divine miracles. Me? I had clawed my way through an architecture degree, paid for my own studio apartment, and landed a job designing buildings most people would never notice. But that wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. The laughter around me wasn't loud, but it was sharp. One woman, my cousin's wife, whispered she actually thought they'd come. Another chuckled behind a flute of moat. These people had never seen me as part of the Vance family. I was the footnote, the faded picture in the back of the album. As I stared at the scraps of my invitation fluttering to the floor, memories slammed into me like a tidal wave. My 9th birthday, when Adrian got a pony ride and I got a lecture. High school graduation, when my parents left halfway through my speech to catch Adrian's fundraiser. Every holiday, every achievement, every tear, overshadowed by the child they had already decided was worthy. That night, I didn't argue. I didn't cry in front of them. I simply gathered what was left of my pride and walked to the elevator. Outside, Elias looked up with a soft smile, unaware. I slipped my hand into his and whispered, "Drive." We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. He kept his eyes on the road, one hand resting gently over mine. I could feel his pulse, steady and warm, grounding me. When he finally asked what happened, I just shook my head. They made their choice, I said. But as the Chicago skyline blurred past the car windows, something inside me twisted. Not from pain, but from clarity. This wasn't the end. This wasn't defeat. It was the beginning. And they had no idea what was coming. 2 weeks after the incident, while insomnia gnawed at me, I opened my phone to check messages. I wasn't prepared for what greeted me. My brother Adrian's birthday gala had taken over social media. Photos glittered across every platform, a ballroom dripping in gold and ivory, guests in black ties sipping champagne beneath a ceiling of imported orchids. A live jazz ensemble played on a raised dais, and Adrian stood center stage in a white tuxedo with a sapphire cufflink that cost more than my college tuition. My mother's caption beneath one photo sliced deep, "Our brightest light. A son who continues to make us proud." My father's echoed the sentiment, "Adrian Vance, our legacy, our pride." I stared at the screen, numb. Not because I wanted the celebration, but because the contrast was blinding. The memory of my invitation in tatters played on a loop in my head. I hadn't even known about the party. No call. No text. No whisper. I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. But something else in the photos caught my attention. At the gala, Adrian stood beside a large banner for the Vance Initiative, a nonprofit supposedly created to fund youth mentorship programs in underserved communities. There were photos of smiling teens, press releases about scholarship funds, testimonials from former recipients. And yet, in every photo, Adrian was draped in luxury. A different designer suit in every shot. A new watch. A limited edition car key dangling from his pocket. The gala itself looked like a royal wedding. I'd been to enough charity events to know this one didn't smell like altruism. It reeked of a tax shelter dressed in glitter. I dug deeper. A LinkedIn post from a former board member hinted at discrepancies. A whispered comment from a journalist friend confirmed suspicions. The numbers weren't adding up. My family adored Adrian's perfect image. But that image had cracks. And I realized then, if those cracks ever shattered, the entire Vance pedestal might collapse. That night, as Elias slept beside me, I sat in the dark staring at the invitation scraps I'd saved in a drawer. I no longer wanted their love. I wanted something else. I wanted them to watch me rise in a way so undeniable, so luminous, that their silence would become a cage of their own making. Elias had always been the calm one. The quiet man who found peace in code and meaning in silence. He never raised his voice, never sought attention. My parents called him plain. A man with potential, they said, if only he weren't so ordinary. They never knew he was anything but. One rainy Thursday, while I was heading to bed early after a brutal design review, I passed by our study and heard him speaking. His tone was sharp, clipped, a side of him I rarely heard. I paused outside the door. "No, I want it filed by morning," he said. "Delay the merger and I'll pull the entire investment." I blinked. Merger? Investment? Curious, I peeked in. His laptop screen displayed a virtual conference room of suited professionals hanging on his every word. Elias, in sweatpants and a hoodie, was orchestrating a multi-billion-dollar deal like he was ordering coffee. When the call ended, I stepped in. "Who are they?" He didn't flinch. Just looked up and closed his laptop. "We need to talk." He sat me down and told me everything. Elias wasn't just a software engineer. He was the founder of Orion Systems, a quietly powerful tech company with government contracts and global clients. He had built it from a dorm room, kept it private to avoid attention, and had used shell corporations to distance himself from public recognition. "You let them call you a failure," I whispered. He nodded. "I needed to be sure you loved me, not the empire." I laughed, not cruelly, but in disbelief. The Vances, with their obsession over status, had dismissed a man Forbes had quietly ranked as one of the youngest tech billionaires in the country. Elias reached into a drawer and pulled out a slim leather folder. Inside were blueprints, not just for a home, but for an estate. A coastal marvel in Santa Barbara. "It's ours now. I closed yesterday. I was waiting to tell you." I looked at him, stunned. "We don't need them," he said. "We never did. Let's build our own world, Leona. Not to prove them wrong. To prove us right." That night, I lay in bed as the storm passed over Chicago, feeling something unfamiliar. Power. The estate sat like a dream carved into the cliffs of Santa Barbara. 45,000 square feet of glass and stone, perched above an endless Pacific horizon. From above, it looked like a cathedral of modern design, terraces hovering over the ocean, walls that dissolved into light, gardens that bloomed year-round with imported flora. Elias handed me the keys with a quiet smile. "Your new canvas," he said. "Design anything you want." It was the most extravagant gift I'd ever received, not because of its price, but because of its freedom. I spent weeks with a team of trusted contractors reimagining the space for something greater than a home. I wanted it to be a sanctuary, a statement, a stage. We began planning the wedding in secret. Every vendor signed strict NDAs. Every RSVP was coded and managed by a small legal team. Only those who had walked with us in truth were invited. No Vances. Not one. I curated the guest list with precision. Humanitarians, entrepreneurs, artists, survivors, and activists, people whose presence meant more than prestige. The theme wasn't luxury. It was legacy. A television producer friend offered to film the event as part of a televised charity special. The Architect's Vow, she called it. A wedding that would fundraise scholarships for young women entering architecture and STEM. The idea electrified me. Let them have their headlines, Elias said. We'll have impact. He funneled millions into the scholarship fund quietly, anonymously. The wedding would air globally. Every flower, every song, every vow, broadcast not for spectacle, but for purpose. I sketched the layout for the ceremony myself, an open-air aisle stretching over the ocean, guests seated in curved rows like the arms of a galaxy. The altar was minimalist, all glass and reflection. We were crafting something eternal. And somewhere back in Chicago, my parents and Adrian would be watching. Not from front row seats, but from behind their own walls of glass. 2 days before the wedding, a package arrived at our Santa Barbara estate. It was small, wrapped in garish red foil, with no return address. Inside, I found a card and a printed invitation. The card read, in my mother's handwriting, "Since you clearly enjoy delusions, we thought we'd play along. Hope it's everything you imagined." The invitation was a mockery, an insult printed on cheap cardstock with cartoon hearts and fake gold embossing. It claimed the wedding would take place in a rented community center on the south side of Chicago, with a potluck reception and a DJ from Craigslist. The RSVP email led to an account that had already been deactivated. They had sent these out. Dozens of them. I knew it in my bones. A cousin confirmed it the same evening. She forwarded me a group text thread, a chain of relatives laughing at the invite, joking about my public breakdown and how I was desperate for attention. It was disgusting. And it didn't hurt. Not anymore. It only confirmed what I'd long suspected: they were losing control. Their grasp on the family narrative was slipping, and this pathetic stunt was their flailing attempt to regain dominance. I showed Elias the fake invitation. He read it in silence, his face unreadable. "Do you want me to respond?" he asked. I shook my head. "No. I want to respond by doing nothing. We go on like we planned. We don't adjust. We don't react. And if they try to crash it?" I smiled. "They won't get within 100 feet. That night, Elias's parents arrived. Warm, generous, kind. They had always treated me like a daughter. His mother pulled me into a hug and said gently, "You don't need to forgive them. You just need to live so brightly they can never shadow you again." I slept peacefully that night for the first time in months. The next morning, our security team ran a final check. The estate was locked down tighter than a presidential retreat. Every entry point was monitored. The guest list was face verified. Media access was restricted. Helicopter surveillance was booked. Let them send all the fake invitations they wanted. The real one had already changed the world. The morning of our wedding arrived like a breath of divinity. Sunlight spilled over the Pacific in molten gold, casting soft shadows through the towering glass walls of the estate. A team of stylists, florists, and coordinators moved like synchronized dancers through the halls, finalizing every detail down to the placement of each orchid petal. I stood in my bridal suite, wrapped in a silk robe, looking at my reflection. My gown, a custom creation from a rising designer, shimmered on the hanger behind me. Hand-beaded, ethereal, and weightless. It looked like it had been spun from stars. "You ready?" Elias asked from the doorway. I turned. He was in his suit already, tailored, understated, sharp. But it was his eyes that caught me, full of reverence, calm, and quiet awe. "I've never been more ready," I whispered. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m., timed with the sunset. By 3:30, the estate was alive with guests, luminaries from across industries, friends, mentors, and strangers who had become family. The network crew set up their final camera angles, drones hovered discreetly overhead, and journalists whispered amongst themselves about the mystery bride who had somehow captivated the attention of half the philanthropic world. The ceremony began with music composed specifically for the event. A quartet played on a floating platform in the reflecting pool. As I walked down the aisle, a hush fell over the guests. My gown caught the dying sunlight, turning me into a prism. Elias stood at the altar, eyes misted. But we weren't the only ones watching. In a penthouse in Chicago, a crowd had gathered. My parents were hosting a networking cocktail hour, a thinly veiled attempt to shift attention back to Adrian, who was now under quiet investigation by a federal financial committee. The television in their lounge had been tuned to a news segment, which suddenly cut to a special broadcast, The Architect's Vow. My mother froze. My father paled. Guests stared in stunned silence as my name, Leona Vance, was announced on screen. "Is that your daughter?" someone asked. "Why weren't you invited?" said another. There was no answer. At the altar, Elias and I exchanged vows we'd written in secret. Honest. Hopeful. Rooted in everything we had endured. When the officiant declared us husband and wife, the estate erupted in applause. And back in Chicago, silence reigned. As dusk melted into twilight, the glass palace radiated with soft amber lights and the sound of laughter and music. Our wedding reception flowed with elegance, a string quartet transitioning into a soulful jazz band, curated dishes prepared by Michelin chefs, and speeches that moved grown men to tears. Cameras rolled, capturing everything. But the most important scene was happening outside the gates. A black limousine pulled up to the estate's private entrance just after 7 p.m. Out stepped my parents, Marcia in a glimmering silver gown, and Elliot in a tux with a velvet bow tie. Adrian followed, his expression smug, a bouquet of roses in his hand. Behind them, 2 hired photographers tried to snap stage shots. They walked up to the security checkpoint with the confidence of people who believed the world would always make space for them. "We're here for the bride," my mother said, smiling at the head of security. He checked his tablet. "Your names aren't on the list." "We're her family," Adrian said, laughing. "She must have made a mistake." The guard didn't blink. "This is a private event. If you're not on the list, you can't come in." A small crowd had gathered behind the gates. Guests saw the commotion. Cameras turned. One of the network producers, recognizing them from old news articles, whispered something into a mic. "You need to step back," the guard repeated. My father snapped, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir." "And that's precisely why you're not getting in." Within minutes, the footage hit the live stream. Someone clipped it and posted it on social media. It spread like wildfire. Imagine disowning your daughter, then trying to crash her televised billionaire wedding, one tweet read. #TooLate began trending. Back inside, Elias took my hand and led me to a quiet balcony overlooking the Pacific. The wind played gently with my veil as he handed me his phone, showing me the trending clip. I watched it in silence. Their faces. The moment they realized the gates were shut. The embarrassment. Then I pulled out my own phone. There was a message from my mother. One line. "Can we come in?" I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back 2 words. "Too late." I didn't send it out of spite. I sent it out of peace. Because this moment was never about revenge. It was about reclamation. Of my voice. My worth. My story. And as Elias and I turned back toward the celebration, laughter rising behind us and the waves roaring softly below, I knew that I had finally built a world where their absence wasn't a wound. It was a boundary. And it was beautiful.